Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Chris Rossini, our co-host. Chris, welcome to the program.
Good morning. Great to be with you, Dr. Paul.
Very good. You know, this week there was a major meeting by the FOMC, and Chairman Powell made his big announcement, which was on Wednesday, and it was a blockbuster in many ways. It was a major decision from my estimation because it was dramatic effort to reverse everything they've been pretending to do since they were trying to correct the problems of the QEs. Well, they did this QEs, created all this money, and which was inflation, and they inflated the money supply by trillions of dollars. And yet the CPI won't go up, so they're going nuts, and they say, well, the economy's doing okay, but things are getting weaker. And all of a sudden, in spite of this economic statistics, there are people saying, well, there's a problem. And then in December, the stock markets went down. So, of course, it's turned out that one of the main functions of the Federal Reserve has been to prop up the stock market. In theory, at least the mandate from the Congress is stable prices and full employment. Well, prices are rather stable, and yet the clamor is for unstable prices. We want more inflation and unemployment, according to the government statistics, even though they don't use the U6 figure, it's still so much better than it had been. But they're in the business of maintaining a very happy Wall Street, and that because in December the market looks like they were a little weaker, and I think the Fed knows exactly what we've talked about, and so many other Austrian economists have talked about. Is there a lot of signs that this economy is not as healthy as some of the statistics show, and therefore what they're doing is they're reacting, and boom, that is what happened on Wednesday. The reaction was pretty dramatic because it was almost like pull on the brakes. We've made another mistake. QE probably wasn't the greatest idea in the world, but it saved the world. And now what we have to do is reverse all this reversal. And so it was dramatic, and it has stirred up our markets, which means that we have to dissect that all out. So to me, it's fascinating, but also very dangerous.
Right, Dr. Paul. And what do we have, 8, 9 years, whatever it was, of zero interest rates? I mean, interest rates should be set by the market, not central bankers artificially taking them to zero. And then they did their QEs 1 and 2 and 3 and Operation Twist, all these euphemisms for how they're messing everything up. And they took their balance sheet from $900 billion to over $4 trillion worth of junk that they have on their books. But it was all just temporary emergency measure. Rates are going to go back to normal. Don't worry. They're going to shrink their balance sheet again. And turns out, like you said, major event, none of it was true. All they did is they created a much bigger bubble that can't even handle 2% interest rates. That's how bad it is. And their balance sheet is just slightly less than $4 trillion. So it was all a big lie. They were not heroes, and they just created another big problem.
Yes, and when you mention bubble, that is a reflection, it's a legitimate term, it's a reflection of monetary policy, and it means it's inflation. But they don't want you to know what inflation really is, and that has to do with manipulation of the money supply and interest rates. So they are saying that one is the biggest problem they've been running into. This one headline I read today is that inflation weakness pushes the central bankers near a reversal. I mean, they're just so desperate to have prices to go up. And they work on the assumption, and you can read it every single day for years and years, that the interpretation of what the CPI is doing will tell us whether or not we have a healthy economy, which means how far removed they are from reality of how markets work. Because, when we did have a bit more of free market economics a few years back, as the economy grew, there was more productivity and more development and more investment. And guess what? Prices went down. And that was good. But now they want to measure the success of their policy by making sure that prices go up at 2%. which means they want to destroy the value, steal the value, which is a tax, from the average person, and they wonder why there's a class war going on. And they've been doing this, and they're desperate. It's also the reason that there's so many people unhappy right now. But ironically, the people who are unhappy, they always have one solution: we're out of money. We're out of money. We need a special tool. That's why we need socialism, because they'll give us more money. And the whole thing is this is a consequence of creating money out of thin air and giving it to the wrong people, and then they don't even know what to do with it, mess up the interest rates, and cause a lot of fiction to exist out there where people believe things that aren't really true. So I think the economic statistics, it isn't so much that they're fudged, but they're misinterpreting them. For instance, the unemployment rate is a U3, which measures the current way of reporting unemployment. But if you use a U6 term, it finds out that unemployment is much, much worse. There's some people who just give up on looking for salaries, looking for a job. Some people will take a part-time job, and they all lumped together. That's why the people are really hurting, because they're suffering the consequences of what the government's been doing. But unfortunately, what they're saying is we have to inflate. And this policy on Wednesday was interesting because they sort of threw in the towel. What they were trying to do was raise interest rates a little bit here and there, and also not get lower, reduce their balance sheet a little bit here and there, which wasn't the case. But they've run into a roadblock, and they said it's not working. But guess who explained that to them? Guess who got the attention of Powell at the Fed? And that's our president. The president didn't like this. But what about this? I didn't know that their politicians could get involved in monetary policy. But lo and behold, the Fed is not independent, and they're supposed to look for stable prices, a high unemployment rate. But their biggest dedication and the reason for this reversal was to protect Wall Street. And in the end, it will not protect the Wall Street. It's not going to protect Main Street either, because all they know about is printing more money. And that's essentially what they said on Wednesday. Print more money, and the stocks at first went down a bit, but they went up a bit. Now they're down, but they're digesting all this. Gold has been strong with this. The dollar though became very, very strong in comparison speaking. So the reactions immediately are things that you can't predict, because there's a lot of emotion tied up into, a lot of misinterpretation and a lot of anticipation on what the other guy's going to do. But in time, things will be sorted out.
Yes, absolutely. The truth always wins out in the end. And if there's one thing about politicians and people in government, is they never are going to admit that they're wrong. Sometimes in their memoirs after they're out of office, they'll say, yeah, we didn't know what we were doing. So they just keep on doing while they're in office. So the Fed, they're only at 2% interest rates. They can only lower by 2%. That's not much that you can lower. So will they go to negative interest rates, QE4? They'll concoct something for sure. And it's the same thing with foreign policy. They never admit they're wrong. They look at Afghanistan, 17 different commanders, and it's always turning the corner. It's the same story. So, but the big difference is the wars are out of sight and out of mind. That happens outside the United States. Nobody here sees it or feels it. But what the Fed is doing, we're going to feel, each one of us, because when they destroy our money, that's when we feel it at the supermarkets with our bills. And we do feel right now, it just goes slowly. But when it goes quicker, then we'll really feel it. It'll really hit us in the belly. So it's very important to understand sound money, and that's the answer to this mess that they're creating.
Yes, and what we're experiencing now has never been experienced before, because we do have a global economy, and we've been managing the global money, the dollar. And therefore, it isn't just a U.S. problem or European problem. It's global in nature, because it was all tied together. And this is something that is going to hit hard, and it's going to hit across the board because it's all been worked on by fiat money and debt. You know, the one thing is they always look at the CPI, but the one thing that they don't look at, a couple of things they don't. One, they don't look at the malinvestment. Where does this money go once they create it? Does it do what it wants to do? Does it produce real wealth? And that's the one question. But the other point should be made that is rarely made because it challenges the politician. And that is if interest rates are 0% or 1%, it makes it very tempting for people to borrow money, especially governments, even if they don't need it. But it sits around and causes all this problem. Then they decide they have to tighten up, and it's just not a functional system that we have today. But thinking about the importance of Wednesday, I think it was March the 20th, I think that date is going to go down in monetary history. Because the other day that in my lifetime that I thought, well, there were several, but the one that I remember best is August 15th, 1971. Of course, another monetary day in history was, of course, when Roosevelt, took the gold away from the American people and made it illegal. You go to prison if you own a gold coin. So that was a big deal. But gold has been re-legalized, but it didn't function too well, and it was hamstringing the politicians. And of course, Nixon closed the gold window and changed things on August 15, 1971. He also added tariffs on there, and he also put on more controls than ever before and closed the gold window. So that was when that's when it dawned on me, after having looked at Austrian economics through the 60s, that the predictions by the Austrians were absolutely correct. And I thought, wow, this is really ushering in a new day and a new age of what was happening. My interpretation was the dollar would go down and gold prices would go up. Back then, gold prices were $35 an ounce. And so it was a big deal, and it became a world fiat currency. It's lasted much longer than a lot of people dreamed it could, and it's still hanging in there. But I think that this date is going to be another one. I think on Wednesday, it was an acknowledgement by the biggest central bank, and that's the Fed, that what we're doing isn't working, and we have to quit. We can't pretend that we can manage this. I think they've thrown in the towel, and they can't tell the truth. I think one of the biggest motivations that the Fed has right now is a recession is coming, or a depression is coming. Because when you produce and create billions and billions, if not trillions of dollars worth of money, you cause the markets to get all messed up. And the money doesn't go where it belongs, and the poor get poorer, the rich get richer. So this is now being acknowledged, and they don't know what to do. So they are giving up, and I don't see any easy answer, because the history of money is that governments, notoriously for thousands of years, have always been tempted to abuse the monetary system, and that's why they have the monopoly. And then when they abuse it, inflate by various means, and run up a lot of debt, there always is a correction. So somebody might say to you, well, there's a recession coming. Are you just, pulling at straws and just predicting that that'll happen? No, it's already in place, and that the recession comes from the malinvestment and the debt, and the debt is in the driver's seat, and all the malinvestment is. There will be a correction, there will be a downturn, and this go around will be worse because it's a fiat monetary global system that brought us to this point. You say, well, what's wrong with globalism? Shouldn't we have free trade? Yes, we should. We should have free trade and healthy trade, but it should be done by sound money developed in the marketplace, and there should be nobody allowed to counterfeit money and artificially manipulate interest rates, and that would hold in check all the governments from spending money, because this permits the big government spending. And because they can get away with it for not only a year or two, but for decades, the people say, well, I get free stuff. And a big problem that the socialists argue, oh, we're not getting enough free stuff, so we want you to print a lot more money. So I think we're at the crossroads right now. I think this March 20th is a big day, and the one thing I remember clearly about April 15th or August 15th of '71 was I belonged to the Chamber of Commerce because I was getting interested in economics and finances, and this came out. I heard the announcement on Sunday night about what Nixon did. And I thought, the end is here. The end is here. This will wake up the people. Why would the businessman like tariffs and all the things and taxes that they were imposing? And I belonged to a legislative action committee that met every Monday at lunchtime. So that was the day after it happened. I went there and I figured, boy, they'll really be upset about all this. And but they weren't upset. They were ecstatic. They were glad there were tariffs being put on. They were glad that Nixon did this and closed the gold window. And the market went up big time that day. And I thought, oh, what's going on here? Something doesn't add up. But I just had to be patient for a few weeks, a few months, and they ushered in the 70s. And if you want to go back and look at the history of the 70s, it was a big deal. So I think March 20th this year, and this reversal that Powell just orchestrated, I think will be remembered for a long time. It's going to take a long time for it to be corrected, as long as they continue to believe that the solution is, if we could only get the prices to go up at a 2% rate, all our problems would be solved. Chris?
Yeah, I'll finish, Dr. Paul. You're right on. We're heading into tough times, and unfortunately, there are some savvy people that are going to look to capitalize. And of all people, it's the socialists. They're going to try to come in and pick up the pieces. And the 1900s was just 19 years ago. It was the deadliest century in mankind's history, where more people died at the hands of their own socialist governments in peacetime. Hundreds of millions of people dead. And not counting the wars, and it was all socialist governments, and they're back trying to capitalize on this. And, President Trump has not helped himself. He has stamped his name on this bubble that he knows is a bubble, because when he campaigned, he called it a big, fat, ugly bubble. So now he's going to have to deal with that, because the socialists will definitely point that out over and over. This was his doing. So if you're a young person, a millennial or even younger, please look into socialism, not in school or the media or your professors. They're not going to tell you. Go on the internet. Go to Mises.org, Ron Paul's websites. It's out there. Talk to relatives that lived in socialist economies, because if they are to succeed, and it's a long shot, but they're going to go for it, then we're all in big trouble.
Very good, and I'm going to close with a brief statement and re-emphasize a couple points. The first is that the measurement of inflation cannot be the CPI, and yet that is ingrained in all our economic textbooks and every news report you hear every night. It's inflation, and they continually push this, believing the CPI is important. Well, in the old days, when the CPI was going up faster than they wanted, they just changed the rules and they changed the definition. Matter of fact, that still exists today, because they want people to be reassured that the Fed's not doing anything wrong, and therefore we want the CPI to be up, because for some people their CPI might be going up at 5% or 6%. Everybody's CPI doesn't go up at the same rate. So that's one thing. But the other thing that I think is going to finally have to be resolved, and that is, once people see what's happening now in the failure of the system, that quantitative easing and trying to get reverse quantitative easing is an absolute total failure. And it's sort of like looking at the wars in the Middle East, even though the people who orchestrated those wars are never admitting that, oh, we made a mistake, a couple million people died, but it was a mistake. No, they never admit that. And that's the way it is here. They would never admit that quantitative easing or the paper money standard, eliminating gold backing to the currency, ever did any harm. So they will always argue that QE had nothing to do with the problems that we're facing today, and that if we could just get the CPI to go up a little faster, everybody would be all right. What a shame. But we'll keep plugging away here on this channel and talking about free market economics and how important it is, but it has to be based in the principles of freedom and liberty. If you have a system that protects individual liberty and property rights and contract rights, believe me, the economic system flows through. But this whole idea that voluntarism is bad and you have to have authoritarians tell us what to do and protect us from ourselves, we're going to have this mess and it's going to get a lot worse. Because I think that we should look at the problems we're facing today as an opportunity, because we could keep saying, see what you guys did, why don't you wake up? And I think that the people who did it will never change their way. They couldn't accept it psychologically. But young people should have an open mind to this, and they're not all going to follow the so-called false promises and lies about the socialists, but there are a lot of young people who are saying, you know, it does make a lot of sense to go in that direction. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.